vulnerability hangover that Brene Brown
Yes.
talks about, where
Yes.
you're just like, it's going to take me years. For me, it took me 8 years to talk about the financial hardships that I went through,
Right.
vocally actually say what was going on. And the fact that you were doing it in such a public way, I could only imagine.
Oh my
You're just
gosh.
like, good Lord. I completely understand it. I think for me, it's the same.
We talked about it yesterday, and I was on the panel yesterday. I was thinking I should probably have some concrete dates in my head because my mind gets a little mixed up. So I looked it up real quick. I'm like, okay, it's been 6 years to the month, this month, when I had my last short sale. And I remember that moment of leaving. I was in this high rise in downtown Chicago.
Wow.
And I remember it was 40 stories. So to go down in the elevator after signing those final papers and like holding it in because all these people are in the elevator with me. And I got outside and I just, like everything just came out because I'm like, oh my God, this is at least 3 years of just short sales.
Yeah.
But really 10 years leading up to it. The buying, the saving for it, everything else. I'm like, this is 10 years and I'm back to.
You did this by yourself.
Oh yeah. And I was back to like ground zero, really, in terms of everything, wealth accumulation, everything was gone. That 20% that I put on all those properties, gone.
And for people watching this or listening to it, I think, I'm inspired by hearing you say this too, because the fact that you're like, you survived that, and that's, I'm like, you did this alone too. You didn't have someone else to be like, oh my God, we're going through this together. And I'm sure your friends didn't understand either because you're in your 20s. I look at that being the only highlight that I'm like, but thank God that this happened to you at 24 too, right? Because I had a few mentors who were seasoned investors. They lost their down payments. They lost their retirement money. That they're like, oh, this was my retirement money, so then I can make sure I have even more money. And a lot of them had to go back to work. And these were people that had children, and they were like, I'm in my 60s. I'm starting all over again. And I can't imagine the shame. And at least for us, we had time. I started investing at 24 too, and I'm like, you start to think like, okay, I have some time, and other people that are listening that lost everything during the crash. That's the only thing I can think of. Or like, you know what? We became stronger, we became smarter, right? We know what to look out for, and you start to understand the market more too. Or kind of like, I always tell people, it's like, when someone's getting sick, because their eyes are watery, their nose is like, they sound stuffy, and you're just like, let me stay away from you because you're sick, right? And I feel the same way about real estate market, with these little signs where I'm like, this neighborhood has a lot of homes for sale, and they're not being bought like this. So what's going on?
There's an issue here.
Yeah, exactly. So you start to pay attention to the shit that's happened to us. You're left to Chris if you need to. you really get past that and say, okay, something else has to change.
Well, it's perspective, right? I did start buying at 24 or 25, I can't remember, and I was done at 34. That's when the last short sale was. So it was 10 years of my life. And to financially see that, and like, what was I doing all this time? I put so much time and energy and money into it to get nothing out of it. But I got the lesson out of it, which is the most important thing, because now I look at it completely different than I did before. And if anyone's hearing this and thinking, what a terrible story, I want to paint the worst, most messiest possible picture of this, to say that now 6 years later, I'm financially independent. I was at my very worst then, and I managed to get my shit together. I managed to, instead of saving all that money to invest in property, saving it, and I invested in myself. I invested in the market during, thankfully, a bull market. Also, the next property I bought was in cash because I could no longer get a loan. After a short sale, you can't get a loan for at least 4 to 7 years. And there was a property upstairs in the same building that I bought. I had 2 short sales in that I was currently renting in, and now they were selling the property upstairs, and I sold everything I possibly could to afford it. Had zero money at the end of it, except for my 401k at that point, and managed still to be able to now achieve financial independence 6 years later. So there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to find it.
And I look at this, hearing your story, you functionally invested in your education with this, what we call hardship of financial. That's how much a lot of students pay into their student debt or for university degree, and don't come out with financial independence at your age.
That is such a good point, because I always say I'm not college educated. I work in an hourly employment job. I don't have a salary. I've gone through a divorce during those 3 short sales. I went through a divorce as well, and there was no alimony or anything. I actually gave him the house and everything in it and just walked away. But I definitely paid a lot in the real estate that would give me a fine ass degree from the School of Hard Knocks, right?
Thank you. And that's something I always tell people, because I did get the degrees, but I also invested in real estate too. And then sometimes people are like, oh, it's because you have, I'm like, no, I learned more out in the real world investing and the the money that you lose, that you gain, that you
Right.
win, that you go through, that is really, I think, a little bit more rewarding for me. And so hearing your story, I'm like, you just, and that's what I say, like, thank God it was when you were in your 20s, as opposed to like some of my, like I said, I still talk to some of them, and their lives still have not changed because they're barely picking up the pieces of the last recession.
Right.
And so, and obviously for us, we get to hopefully not only educate, but hopefully inspire our own friends and colleagues in our age that have never bought a place, that they're literally just starting out now.
Right.
So hopefully we say, okay, try not to do this.
Yeah.
And try to make sure you do this, because then they probably feel like, thank God you went through so much, because you can actually give me advice on what not to do or what to make sure to look out for.
Right.
Because sometimes, especially as women, and that's why I said if you had any challenges buying a property, because for me, I always got the question, wait, you're not married, or you're not going to have your parents co-sign with you, or a boyfriend, or, you know, are you sure, or, you know, and it instilled a lot of doubt.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I'm already feeling doubtful of buying a place by myself. I don't need, you know, the people around me to say, are you sure? So if the numbers made sense, that's what I was always telling them, and they did. So I think it's empowering to hear other women, your story. When I heard it yesterday, I was like in the back. She was an amazing panelist, and we're on a panel today as well, so we're going to talk about all about our and real estate investing.
panel, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, it's going to be really great with these other women too, because I think once we see ourselves with other women doing the same thing, you're like, oh my God, I felt so alone there. I thought I was the only one that went through something like that. Or maybe I never went through that, but they managed to overcome it, then I shouldn't fear that so much. Because if it happens to me, I know that I'm okay. I know that I can reach out to Bianca and be like, oh shit, I'm going through this right now.
Yeah.
And as women, we need to have this openness, this conversation, because it really does affect our communities. Like, you're from Chicago, I'm from LA. So these are happening high market areas.
Right.
Rent is ridiculous. Home ownership is another rental property. So we can say, well, you know what, if we can do it in these cities, you can definitely do it in some other ones that you're not going to be, you know, spending way too much on the down payment. And that's partly why I always say invest out of state as well if you're in those areas that you can. But thank you so much for sharing your story.
Absolutely.
We're definitely going to have to do a follow-up, because we're about to go on, so we have to make sure that we have enough time to get ready.
Sure, we gotta go.
But we're actually in the Seattle Art Museum.
Yes, beautiful.
It's a beautiful venue, and hopefully you get a little chance to see the back of the sculptures behind us. But I was like, dude, we're in the same place at the same time. Let's do it before you leave. You have a flight later on today.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the best thing about podcasting. And I would love to have you back, and we can definitely talk about this for days. So we're going to have to break this up into 20. So
do you have show notes?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
so I'll make sure I get all that stuff.
I want to add some actionable tips to your show notes so people don't wind up how I did.
Thank you.
Yes.
And so if you can, before we end, can you tell us, well, this is a question I always ask everyone, and then you tell us how people can find you. Do you remember getting that first, whether it's a paycheck or cash, that made you think differently from a 9 to 5 and be like, oh my gosh, this is how much money I can make?
Well, yeah, my grandpa tells a story, and I don't recall this, but when I came home from my first W-2 job and I was waiting tables, I came home and I showed him my paycheck. I go, Grandpa, who's FICA, and why is he taking all my money? He's like, oh God. So yeah. I do remember that. I do remember thinking, I don't get as much as they say I'm gonna get, right?
Yeah. So it put in perspective how much you're actually spending, right?
Right.
So I always love to hear people's story that like you just never know how much money you make, and you're like, until the first, you're like, you either feel good about it or you feel
I did not feel good about it.
I felt the same way. I was very few people. A lot of people are like, oh, I felt wonderful. I was like, this is it. You know, like what happened to me? You know, I was thinking I'm going to be making some money. You know, so it's but it always lets us know that we were ahead of our time too, thinking of differently. When like we can't just think the traditional 9 to 5. Right. There needs to be supplemental passive income too. So, how can people find you?
So I blog at missmazuma.com, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram also, Miss Mazuma, MISSMAZUMA. And yeah, that's the best place.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to having you on our next Financially Savvy in 20 minutes.
Thanks for having me.